Bianca. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to what is a different and exciting and interesting event that we are having here at LAC. I should introduce myself. My name is Frank Moore. I'm the director of the Latin American and Caribbean Center, and again, thanks for joining us this evening. We usually have panels and seminars, but we've never had, at least in the short time that I have been here, a kind of a musical narration of the region, and particularly of the Andean region. And I'm particularly excited about the Andean region because we've started about a year ago now, I think, the Andean Studies program. It's one of our programs of excellence at the Latin American Caribbean Center. And we're receiving a lot of good support from faculty and students and staff in putting the program together. And I want to recognize the person who started this all off and helping me start the Andean program and in putting this particular program together, Professor Bianca Premel. Thank you so much. More applause than I did, Bianca. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce to you the new director of the Andean Studies program. Is she outside or is she in the room? Oh, there you are. Graciela Panting is here. She just recently joined us, and she will be helping us as we move forward and putting a series of academic and outreach programs on the Andean Studies, and we are more than happy to talk to you some more about the program. Let us now turn to, while you're all here, for this event. When Bianca came to me with this idea and the idea of having what was essentially an academic narration of someone and someone who will be performing music, I thought that was different. Certainly I hadn't been a participant or attended an event like that, but she identified the right people for the event. And before I even introduce him, I just want to thank Professor John Chasteen and Angela Moncada for being here, for coming to Miami, and for participating in this very important event. Let me introduce both of them first, and then I'm going to ask John if he could come up and start the discussion. You all hopefully have a program. Please do. We put a lot of effort into the program. There is a bio a short, brief bio for John and for Angela, but I just want to highlight a couple of items on each. John Chasteen, as I think many of you know, is a very well-known and respected scholar, a historian. I'm embarrassed to say that I've only read one of his books, Blood and Fire, but that was a very important book that he published and continues to, I think, update and revise. He is, as you know, at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and has been very involved in these kinds of events, both in North Carolina and other places. He's a cultural historian, has written about bandits and all kinds of interesting things. And he is, as I mentioned, the right person to start us off in terms of the narration. So John, again, thank you for being here. And of course, Angela Moncada, who is a person who does all kinds of things with music, both in terms of a composer, therapist, and her range of activities and expertise is really, really quite impressive. And she's coming to us from Colombia. And so I'm very much looking forward to listening to John and listening, of course, to Angela, and seeing how this all works out. This is something that I hope we can continue doing in the future. Once again, thank you all for being here, for supporting the Andean Studies program. And so with that, let me turn to John to please start us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. We're here for a big treat tonight, and I'm not it, let me tell you. My job is to keep you from leaving before we get to hear some really beautiful music by one of the most accomplished guitarists of Colombia. And what I would like to do is talk to you about some things that I think most of you actually know something about, although you might not have spent much time thinking about it. And that is that we're going to think about the great music tradition, the great folkloric tradition that is common to much of Spanish America. The Andes are right at the center of it, and we're going to use the Andes as our route to take a tour of some important elements of this musical tradition. What I want to do is to talk about why it's such a big deal, why it's so important, why Spanish Americans tend to invest a lot more, I think, sense of identity, regional identity, national identity in their folk music when compared to the United States. So that's the agenda, and let me get started. First, let me just say a few words about the Andes. Of course, you all know they're big mountains. You know where they are. What I want to point out is that they run right across the tropics. And being very high, that means that they create a lot of microclimates, because if you're down at sea level, it's very hot, tropical. If you're about halfway up, it's much less tropical, and sometimes people talk about eternal springtime weather. And if you're high enough up, then it's cold. And in addition, these microclimates are not very far from each other. They could be actually no more than a kilometer away. Of course, much of that kilometer is climbing or going down, but it makes a tremendous difference. And that means that they are also habitats that are appropriate for different sorts of crops. And in the process of the colonization of Latin America, they created a highly variegated set of local societies that combined various combinations of the same elements that were present in most places. So these elements you're very familiar with. I know if you've ever been to a concert of Latin American folk music, you've probably opened up the program and found some kind of reference to the fecund combination of elements that come in from Spain. You know, there's the guitar. Native America, there are the flutes. Africa, there are the percussion instruments. I mean, this is absolutely standard. It's very important. There's a lot of truth in it. But in addition, it's also a very important construction. There's a lot invested in this idea because of what I will be talking about. Oh, I don't want to spill all the beans yet, okay? I mean, I think many of you maybe know where I'm going, which is towards the very important and also controversial now and contested idea of mestizaje. Latin American folk music is, above all, in some ways, the greatest demonstration, example of the idea of mestizaje as racial and cultural mixing. And the Andes provides a tremendous variety of situations in which that mix occurred, with different predominations of groups depending upon the altitude and geographic location. What often happens, however, in the description of this mix is that it's presented in a very sort of warm, fuzzy, feel-good mode in which the beauty of the music, the harmony of the music, suggests the harmony of the social relations that the music sprang from. And as historians, we know that that's not so true. Harmony there was, at times, also conflict. There was happiness and there was social exploitation involved. What I want to do is, in the time that I have, in a fairly summed up way, is talk about the development in more specific terms, how this music was actually created in real social situations. Maybe one of the most important of those situations was created by the church. The church was obviously interested in bringing together all sorts of people. Being a Catholic church with a large C or a small c, the idea was it needed to involve everyone. And among the situations in which people were brought together were various situations that would involve music and dance. And in these situations, you might be surprised to think that while the church was obviously interested in inculcating various of its European ideas, it also tended to welcome the native peoples or people of African descent who were present, bringing in their own musical ideas. And the reason that they did that was for the same reason that the church in early medieval Europe brought in various pre-Christian ideas and customs. And it's because if you want to bring people to your party, it really helps if they get to bring something of their own, something that they're identified with, something that they think is fun and important. So just as a tiny example, in Europe, where pre-Christian religions in the north involved the idea of tree spirits, well, if you want to get people enthused about a new celebration that is something they haven't done before, well, let them bring something of their own with them and help bring them on board. If they think that trees are full of spirits, let them bring their trees inside and call them Christmas trees. And it is something that is just it's a time-honored way of garnering enthusiasm among the people who are being proselytized. And so something very much like that also happened in Latin America. And one of its important venues would be in the situations in which the church was sponsoring on any particular fiesta or feast day a procession. Now, we tend to think of the processions these days as somber affairs, nothing very much like a party. But in fact, many of these processions were very much like parties. In fact, they were big parties. And it was even the case that after an important procession, especially a nocturnal procession, there would be a lot of pregnancies. Because this was an event that was bringing people out of their houses, and they were mixing around in the dark. Nobody was really, watching very carefully who was going where and behind what bush. And people were getting together. Listen, this happened in the United States too. In the Second Great Awakening, any sort of tent revival on the frontier. 9 months later, a lot of babies came out of those situations. So this is kind of a universal pattern, or maybe it's not universal, but very common in its specific manifestation. And in these processions that were often rather like parties, there was a lot of singing and dancing. And here's the important thing. The singing and dancing was intended, at least partly, to indicate the participation of various groups that were being brought into the church and demonstrate their enthusiasm for the overall project. This was very especially in the processions of Corpus Christi. So, if you're having a procession of Corpus Christi, you might want to have the Aymaras, present doing their dance, in which their dance and their singing is emblematic of their collective identity and enthusiasm as part of this overall project. And it was the same with people of African descent. They were invited to be part of these celebrations, and they were invited also to play themselves, so to speak, to show that, let's say, if this is the Congos who are doing this dance, the idea was they'll do a Congo dance to show that the Congos are on board with the project, with the religion. And the maintenance then of various patterns of musical and dance activities was something that contrasts with what existed in the United States, when more often drums were banned, that kind of thing. In religious situations, these manifestations of what we might think of as ethnic expression were explicitly ruled out. So it was a very different situation. Another kind of situation that is contrasting would be the sort of thing that would happen in the back rooms of taverns, or maybe down by the docks, or maybe in vacant lots or on the edge of town, when poor people, very often of European, African, and indigenous descent, would be gathering together basically for their own parties. This was very different because the church was absolutely not in favor of this, and considered it to be dirty dancing in a way, and would prohibit it. And then the next year, they would prohibit it again because the prohibition hadn't worked. And then the year after that, they would double prohibit it because it still hadn't worked, and it never worked. And during the 18th century, particularly in the second half of the 18th century, we find a rising tide of this kind of dancing and music, which is happening informally all over America. And what was it like? What was going on? There are various kinds of music being played according to what valley it is, high up, low down, on the coast, wherever, always a distinctive mix of the same familiar elements. And there would be dancing, and the dancing was very often quite similar, right? I think you're going to recognize this. Imagine some people milling around. It's a party. They're drinking something. People are laughing. Spirits are rising at some particular moment without it having been organized. A circle sort of forms, and people are laughing and clapping their hands. And then somebody gets pushed into the circle. Have you been there? Have you been to this party? Okay. And then once they're in the circle, maybe two people get pushed into the circle, and they're going to be a man and a woman. And then this is intensely embarrassing, especially if I'm the man. And so then the issue is, all right, now what do I do? How do I be a man? You know, how do I dance as a man? This is very, loaded, important stuff. People are learning gender roles and things like that. And they're going to dance, these two people are going to dance in the circle until what? You guys know. What? Until what? Sorry? Yeah, until one of them finds a way to get out, maybe pull somebody else in. And actually in the full, traditional form, the way that you got somebody else in was by giving them an ombligada, which is actually an Angolan thing. It's not very often used these days, but still, the principle remains. And I bet you didn't know when this happened last year, or whenever you were at a party when it happened, that this was a really ancient thing. You probably think it was sort of improvised in the moment, which in a way it was, but not for the first time. This has been going on for centuries. And the church was absolutely against it. As I said, it was not viewed as anything that could be tolerated, but then actually It had to be tolerated because it couldn't be halted. Now, this brings us to around the year 1800, or let's say more like the year 1810, right? The wars of independence. And then there's going to be a very important change. The change has to do with the circumstances, and I'll make this a quick story of independence, and that is that the initiative was taken by people at the top of the social hierarchy. And yet, and these were mostly people of purely European descent, often called Creoles these days, who needed, however, if they were going to have any chance of winning this war, they needed other people too. They weren't enough. They needed to bring with them other people down the social hierarchy and get them on the same side, which was not necessarily an easy thing to do, because many of those people farther down the social hierarchy felt like they had been pretty much oppressed by the people who now wanted them to make common cause. An interesting thing that happens now, not now, 200 years ago, can be gauged by the way that the word Americano changes. In 1800, an Americano in Spanish America was a white, native-born Spaniard. Americano was short for Español Americano, okay, which was the opposite of an Español Europeo. It was a white person. But during the wars of independence, when the patriot leaders were trying to rally the troops, when they're trying to gain support from other people down the social hierarchy, and they were always speaking to Americanos. They weren't saying Chilenos, Argentinos, Peruanos. They weren't saying that. They were saying Americanos, you're on our side. And they begin to speak to everybody who was out there. They began to stretch the word Americano so that it fit like an umbrella over anybody who was born in America. Everybody who was born in America got to be, rhetorically anyway, an Americano by the time that these wars were over. It took on its more modern meaning. So we can really see the importance of them creating a collective identity that is inclusive, because if they could get everybody born in the New World on their side, the game was over. They won. Okay? Because actually the European-born Spaniards were very few. But how convincing is this? Well, one of the most convincing things, one of the best ways of feeling like this could really be true was in music and dance. Because it's in the wars of independence that the stuff that had been dirty dancing was raised and put on a patriotic pedestal as a demonstration of the existence of a common American culture that was shared by everyone born in the New World, but not shared by the Spaniards. And so, it's actually in the armies of independence and around them that the dances that we today think of as national dances and the music that goes with those dances, the connection between dance and music is so close, right? It's actually in the wars of independence that these dances begin to take on this quality of being emblems of collective identity, the identity of a region, the identity of a country. At the beginning, it was just American identity. So in the first part of the 19th century, then, you begin to have dances that we could recognize today. Cueca, right, would be patriotic dance associated with the wars of independence and associated with the new American nation. After that, there is another step whereby the national dances are transformed as the political situation is transformed. You have not just, it ends up being not an American nation, it ends up being many nations, right? Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, it ends up being many nations. And there's trouble between these nations. And sometimes nations break apart, and there are lots of things happening, especially in the 20th century. The new need to reach out to national populations, again, more directly to bring in people who have not been actively participating in the nation. And then the national music changes to create a new representation. I want to give you some examples because of, examples are so important. All right, so let's go back to the cueca, okay, which begins to appear in the 18 teens. Where is it first danced? It's first danced by and around the armies of San Martin, who has brought his army from Argentina to Chile. Later he'll take it up to Peru. And the local women are going out to celebrate with the troops, and they are dancing the cueca together, not in people's houses usually, because it wasn't too long ago that this was dirty dancing. But they might be dancing very especially in a place called a chingana. And a chingana was simply a venue for popular celebration and dance in the back of a tavern, often outside on the edge of town. Often there would be a big flag over it. It was very consciously something that people were thinking of as an exciting new kind of sociability that made the idea of a new nation real. It made it something that they could feel, that they could share with each other, that they could see was real when people of various different extractions were dancing together. It's interesting that among the most famous dancers at chinganas in Santiago were women of African descent from Lima. And that's not so odd, because Lima had been the cultural center of the Pacific coast during the colonial period, more prestigious than Santiago by far. And after all, San Martin had taken his army up to Lima and been there for a number of years, and so the same dance that had started with his army arrived in Lima in that way. But what happens, so that's the nationalist consecration of this dance. A dance of two, it's just like the dance in the circle. It's a guy and a woman who are facing each other. They don't touch. They undergo the sort of pantomime of courtship. He's trying to get her interested. She's not being interested and turning away. They're twirling the handkerchiefs, This goes on everywhere pretty much. It was going on in Peru as well. And, okay, then there's the transformation. What happens after 1879, when actually not for the first time, Peru and Chile are at war with each other? And they both have their national dances, which are the same dance, and they both are patriotic, I guess. It's not going very well for Peru, okay? But at least the Peruvians have some important early naval victories. But they really have a big problem, because their version of this dance, which at this time is usually being called samacueca, the particular version of it which is very popular in Lima at this time is, unfortunately, wait for it, La Chilena. So what are they going to do with La Chilena in this world? Well, a journalist decides the best thing to do is change the name. And since the Navy has had some heartening victories, La Marina, he says, let's call it La Marinera. And so here you can really, transitions, name changes. It's in some ways, at least one dimension of it is very much about politics, about nation, about collective identities. Okay, here's one more really good example before I run out of time. And that has to do with a dance called the Bambuco in Colombia. Now, these days, the Bambuco is thought of as a regional dance that above all represents Andean Colombia in contradistinction to the coast with its more predominantly Afro-Colombian populations. But back in the 1820s, back in the period of independence, actually, the Bambuco. So this is a dance that is that in the early period, in the 1820s and 1830s, is known to be a dance, especially of people of African descent, in southwestern Colombia, in the Cauca region. And through this area march the armies of Simón Bolívar on their way south to meet San Martín. That doesn't go well either, but we won't get into that. And so as they're marching through this region, the Bambuco takes on the aura of here's a national dance which shows we're really Americans because we're mixed, right? The way that you knew it wasn't Spanish was that it had the non-European elements in it. That's what made it American. And so they're marching through and they become enthused with this music. And by the time that they're down, it has sort of become the informal soundtrack of the army. So that when they get down to the final battle against the Spanish at Ayacucho, and there are famous patriotic words uttered that, I forgot who said it. Some Colombian can tell me in here, but when they advanced, they were told to advance and to step like victors, right? Con paso de vencedores, right? So they're advancing across the battlefield, and the band is playing. Da dee la da da, da dee da dee da da, da dee da dee da la dee da dee da dee da da, La Guaneña. La Guaneña, right? Which was, I don't know. Knowing that happened on the battlefield makes me I never wanted to be on a battlefield before, but I would have liked to have seen that. And during the middle of the 1800s, then Bambuco is the national dance of Colombia. And through most of the 19th century, until the 20th century when there's a transformation. And that transformation is about the recognition of the importance of creating a vision of Colombia that engages a wider kind of popular enthusiasm. And the music that is engaging wider popular enthusiasm in the 1950s is the music from the Atlantic coast of Colombia, the representative dance of which is cumbia. And so there, and as I'm saying this, I'm forgetting that I'm remembering something. So anyway, so cumbia then becomes a national dance in the 20th century, replacing the 19th century national dance. Bambuco. What I need to do now is say that this same kind of transformation also occurred in Peru in the 20th century. The marinera is not considered the national dance of Peru anymore. It's been sort of demoted to a regional status, which is what happened to the Bambuco. What happened in Peru was there was a new felt need to create a national music and dance that was more representative of people in the highlands who had not been playing an important part in the national project. And the idea was you needed to represent them, to engage them, to bring them in by allowing them to see more of themselves in the national image, in the national culture. And so since there were a lot of anthropologists up there, they began to look around and they found a dance that they thought was the right one, and that's called el huayno, okay, which is much more specifically indigenous. And the thing about the huayno is that it is one of the few dances up there that was a dance of a male-female couple. In fact, the word huayno, I don't speak Quechua, but I understand that that is specifically what huayno means. It's the couple dance. And that was very important because the national dance, or these various kinds of national music, in addition to representing an ethnicity, they also represented the nation, the man, woman, as sort of the family, and also, very importantly, the potential that this man and woman could actually, you could imagine they could have a child who would be the fusion of the two, and the idea of the various elements of the nation mixing together. So, what I hope that I have explained is why there is such a powerful investment and quasi-political investment in Spanish American folk music. It goes way back, and there are various steps involved. And also why it is so closely linked to the idea of mestizaje, which is such a key idea in the formulations of national identity that during the entire 20th century were predominant in Latin America, why it's the greatest example of mestizaje, and in some ways the most persuasive one. So, at that point, are we going to invite questions here? Okay. All right. So now, all right. Thank you. You've waited very patiently through all of this, and so now we're going to get to the good part. I would like to invite Angela Moncada to come up on stage with me. I met Angela a few years ago when I had the pleasure of hearing her play, also playing a little bit with her. Boy, that was fun, let me tell you. Boy, she made me sound good. And have her at my house. And I think that the thing that's really most powerful and important for us here is that this woman is really a living part of the tradition that she was born into it. Her whole life has been bound up in it. I mean, there's a long list of festivals that she's been at, and a lot of those festivals she's been at, she won. CDs that she has made, some of which are available. And it's really so our tour of the Andes, okay? In our tour of the Andes, we're going to be touching on music that is played in various parts from north to south. And in this larger tradition that I've spoken of, the guitar is absolutely the center. And in some ways, the guitar is also the definitive part, because I want you to watch this right hand, okay? Watch this right hand, because the right hand is going to define what rhythm it is. You know how we talk about rhythms? There's this rhythm, there's that rhythm. Well, really, it's not a signature, it's not a time signature on a written partiture that defines the rhythm. It's the guitarist's right hand. in the very, combination of different kinds of strokes. So I want you to be watching that, but I also wanted to ask Angela to speak a few words before she starts playing, and then when she starts playing, then you'll forget everything else. But I wanted to ask her to just speak a few words, y quería preguntarle o quería pedirle que nos hablara, aunque sea un poco de la familia de ella, que es muy importante en la música colombiana, y cómo fueron los comienzos de su vivencia con la música. ¿Ok? Ángela Moncada.
Bueno, vengo de una familia de tradición musical, vengo desde mi abuelo. A los 3 años conocí por primera vez un instrumento en mis manos, que fue el tiple, que es nuestro instrumento nacional colombiano, un instrumento que tiene las primeras notas de la guitarra, mi, si, sol, re, y viene cada cuerda en orden de 3. Y a los 3 años empecé a tocar el tiple, a los 8 años inicié el trabajo con la guitarra, fue mi padre el primer profesor que tuve de música, y allí inicié pues el proceso con diferentes miembros de la familia, donde aprendí solfeo, aprendí a tocar algo de piano y comenzó pues mi vida musical. Lo interesante de mi familia, que es una generación donde empezó todo el trabajo de tradición oral de la música folclórica del país, siendo toda la música de la parte andina, de la montaña, aprendiendo los ritmos folclóricos como el bambuco, pasillo, torbellino, entre muchos otros.
Gracias. Entonces vamos a empezar la gira en el sur e ir hacia el norte.
cueca. Vamos con una samba argentina. candombe. carnavalito. danzante ecuatoriano. Bambuco. colombiano. Cumbia.
Thank you, Bianca. Muchísimas gracias, Ángela. Estamos excelente. I have a thought. We have time and want to have time for questions and comments. So if, Ángela, si no le importa, le voy a pedir que toque una canción más, una música más, y después le voy a pedir al profesor que nos acompañe aquí para las preguntas. Y después tenemos varias preguntas, y después we have a reception. After, well, you'll be able to interact, of course, with Angela and with John. But first, we're going to listen to one more, and then bring Professor Chastain up to the stage for a question and answer, and then we'll have our reception. Okay? Thank you. That was wonderful, maravilloso. We have a mic, hopefully it's working, over here. So please come up, ask questions, make a comment of either John Chastain or Angela. So, okay, anybody? Come on. Yes, please, come to the mic. Come on, get up. Get to the mic. We're recording everything.
My question is about the guitar. Just want to know the name. Looks a little different than your average guitar. Si nos podría decir un poco sobre la guitarra.
La guitarra que traje el día de hoy es una guitarra hecha por un luthier ecuatoriano, el maestro Chiliquinga. Es una guitarra que en la embocadura tiene el símbolo de la flor de la vida y la fabricación permite que tenga muchísima mejor proyección el sonido.
La última música.
La última obra fue de Venezuela. Fue una fantasía entre un tema alma llanera y dos favores. El vals es peruano. Vals peruano.
Comentario. Aquí. Sí.
No sé si John sepa o nos pueda decir algo del bunde y si y a mí me confunde en qué momento se produjo esa transformación de una cosa que aparentemente era una fiesta muy ruidosa, muy peligrosa, muy mal vista, a una cosa que terminó siendo como un folclore muy del interior, muy pacífico.
Bueno, en cuanto a cómo se produjo y cuándo esa transformación, no sé, tal vez Ángela puede saber más que yo, pero yo sí sé esto, que forma parte de, digamos, un padrón muy general, y es que sigue exactamente el mismo curso. Un nombre que quiere decir como fiesta popular, ruido, baile popular, que son samba, quiere decir eso, tango, quiere decir eso, joropo, quiere decir eso, ¿sí? Es muy común que un nombre que quiere decir básicamente fiesta popular se vuelva más tarde un ritmo, un son más específico. Entonces no sé nada en cuanto al proceso específico, en cuanto al bunde, pero yo sé que cabe dentro de ese mismo esquema. ¿Tú sabes cómo, no?
Conocimiento sobre esa parte, pero algo del punte. cuando acompaña el bambuco, por ejemplo, que son con los bordones, le dicen guitarra marcante. Y cuando es la persona que está haciendo la melodía, guitarra armónica.
Iba a hacer la pregunta, pero la última canción es irresistible para mí. Yo soy cubano, me suena como una guajira cubana. ¿Qué influencia hay entre el ritmo cubano, los varios ritmos cubanos y algunas de las cosas que ha tocado hoy? Si
Diría que forma parte de esa misma tradición, ¿no? O sea, no sé decir nada más específico, pero sí, parentesco seguro que hay.
Have a reception. But first, I want to thank all of you for coming to this very special event. It was truly a treat, as John said. I hope to be doing more of this in the future. I want to thank, as I mentioned, Bianca Premo for bringing this to our attention, and of course, Graciela Panting, and to the Graduate Student Organization of the History Department for their partnership and support of this. I want a special thanks to Sally Zamudio, who is makes all of this happen, and of course makes me look good. And John, thank you so much for being. This was wonderful. Your talk was, to me, very interesting. I learned a lot. And finally, Angela, muchísimas gracias. Le agradezco su participación. De LAC y de FIU le queremos dar un... Thank you again. Please, one more time for John and for Angela. Okay. Please join us in the reception. Thank you.